Every story hides a secret. Let's uncover it. So, this story begins with a boy named Blake, who lived with his father Grady in the forests of a village in Oregon. Grady was very strict, and he was raising Blake as if he were training a soldier. Every morning, he made sure Blake woke up on time, followed a strict routine, and completed all tasks with discipline. Their daily life also included early morning hunting trips together. Although Blake didn't really enjoy this lifestyle, he had no choice but to follow it. Even today, Grady woke him up early, gave him food, handed him a gun, and took him into the forest. Blake was very excited because this was the first time he would get a chance to fire a gun. But before starting the hunting trip, Grady showed Blake a beautiful view, after which they began climbing a mountain. On their way, as they crossed rivers and dense woods, Blake spotted a mushroom. Just as he was about to touch it, Grady scolded him. Because everything beautiful in the forest was also very dangerous. Grady explained to Blake how to find the right mushrooms and reminded him that the jungle was not a place for children. Along with its breathtaking views, death was always lurking nearby, and if Blake made even a small mistake, not even Grady could save his life. That's why Blake had to stay alert at all times to survive. Meanwhile, a deer suddenly appeared in front of Grady. He aimed his gun, but before he could fire, the deer ran away. It was the first time Blake had ever seen a deer, so he wandered deeper into the forest just to watch it closely. But as he followed the deer, the ground beneath his feet seemed to vanish, because instead of the deer, a huge monster stood before him, moving straight toward him. Blake was terrified, but just in time, Grady reached him. Grady scolded him harshly for going so deep into the jungle. But then the monster, Grady also saw it, and quickly ran with Blake into a nearby hunter's cabin. But the monster hadn't given up on them yet. It started moving toward the cabin too, though because Grady had a gun, the creature left without harming them. Before leaving, however, the monster brutally attacked a deer, which terrified Grady even more. When they got back home, Grady lied to Blake, saying it wasn't a monster, just a big bear. But Blake discovered the truth when he overheard Grady talking about the creature with a friend. From that conversation, it became clear that the monster was a hiker, a man-eating werewolf that had disappeared in the 1990s after being transformed by a virus called Nom. Grady then asked his friend to come into the forest and help hunt down the werewolf, while he sent Blake away to the city to keep him safe. From here, the story jumps 30 years ahead, where Blake has now grown up. Blake had a daughter named Ginger, whom he loved deeply. Whenever she got into trouble, Blake would immediately rush to protect her. Even today, he saved her from a cunning man and taught her to be careful with strangers. After reaching home, he spent time playing with her. A little later, Blake's wife Charlotte returned from work. As soon as she arrived, she handed Blake a court notice about Grady. 30 years ago, when Grady had gone to hunt the human werewolf, he disappeared and never came back. Because of this, the court had now officially declared him dead. Although Blake and his father never had a good relationship, since Grady often scolded him, Blake still felt the pain of losing him. All of his father's belongings were now his, but not his father himself. Meanwhile, there was also some distance growing between Blake and Charlotte, as she was always busy with her work. And so, the next day, Blake waited outside Charlotte's office for her to come out, and Charlotte felt a bit confused when she saw him standing there. Blake told her that after his father's death, he had no one left in this world except Charlotte and Ginger. That's why he wanted to give their relationship another chance, hoping they could grow closer again. To make this happen, Blake planned a summer trip with Charlotte and Ginger to Grady's old house, where he used to live with Grady. This way, he could also recall some moments spent with his father, and they could all enjoy a peaceful time away from the busy city. Charlotte agreed to his plan, and within a few days, they packed their essentials into a small truck and set off towards the mountains of Oregon. Along the way, Charlotte, Blake, and Ginger had fun together, and Ginger especially enjoyed the journey. But as soon as they entered the Oregon mountains, their GPS suddenly stopped working. After so many years, even Blake had forgotten the way to his father's house. In the forest, he took a wrong turn with the truck. Suddenly, Charlotte noticed a man in a nearby hunter's cabin holding a gun. Seeing this made her a little uneasy, but Blake calmed her down, explaining that in such places it's normal for people to keep weapons. Meanwhile, the hunter came closer to Blake's truck and started talking to him. From the conversation, it became clear that the hunter was Drake, the son of Blake's father's old friend. Grady had already mentioned Drake on the radio while talking about the werewolf. Since Drake's house was not far from Grady's, He sat in the front seat with Blake to guide him. However, Charlotte didn't feel safe about this, though she couldn't openly oppose Blake. As they moved ahead, the road was completely silent. Because there was no electricity, most of the people who once lived in the mountains had already moved to the cities. During the journey, they continued talking. When Blake was asked about his work, he replied, "I am a writer, but since I'm currently unemployed, I take care of my daughter." Charlotte, on the other hand, was a famous journalist, and learning this greatly impressed Blake. Suddenly, Blake slammed the brakes hard because a human-like wolf appeared right in front of their truck. Everyone's eyes widened in shock at the sight. The truck lost balance, slid into a ditch, and got stuck on some rocks. Acting quickly, Charlotte grabbed Ginger and climbed onto the roof of the truck. Blake noticed that the wolf was still chasing them. Tried to attack him, but the glass window saved him. Then the creature turned on Breck, tearing his body apart before dragging him away. After the wolf left, Blake somehow managed to get out, and with Charlotte and Ginger, he started heading toward his father's house. Ginger, terrified by the man-eating wolf, was deeply shaken. That's why Blake held her tightly in his arms, trying to comfort her. Somehow they managed to rush inside the house. On the way, they kept hearing the growls of the wolf chasing them, but since they got in just in time, the wolf could only scratch at the door. In the end, Blake and his entire family were safe from it. Relieved that the danger had passed, Blake went down to the basement, switched on the lights, and came back upstairs. There, he saw that Ginger was still terrified and desperately wanted to return to her home. But because it was already night, they couldn't leave the forest. They had no choice but to wait until morning. While putting Ginger to sleep, Blake apologized, admitting that it was his fault Charlotte and Ginger were trapped there. If anything happened to either of them, he would never be able to forgive himself. He told Ginger, "I love you deeply. I will protect you even if it costs me my life." Standing outside, Charlotte overheard every word. When Blake came outside, she tried to ask him about the monster. But Blake didn't know anything about it. He had only seen it standing on the road like a human, and in panic, his truck met with an accident. To protect himself, Blake started piling heavy objects against all the doors so the creature couldn't enter. Deep inside, however, he was terrified because he knew the monster was extremely dangerous and could break in any time if it wanted. At the moment, their phones had no network, so they couldn't call for help from outside. Just then, Blake remembered Grady's old radio, which was still kept in the basement. He quickly turned it on and tried sending out an SOS message. But in that deadly forest, all his attempts failed. Suddenly, his eyes fell on an old refrigerator nearby, where Grady used to store meat after hunting. There was still some deer meat inside. Without thinking, Blake ate it, which was indeed a very strange thing to do. Just then, Blake's tooth broke and fell into his hand, which left both Charlotte and Blake a little shaken. They couldn't understand what was happening to him. At that moment, Charlotte noticed a wound on Blake's hand caused by the wolf's claw, which meant he was now cursed by the same wolf, something he knew very little about. Charlotte quickly took out some medicine from the medical box, applied it to his wound, and wrapped it with a bandage. The injury was still very painful, but Blake asked Charlotte to try contacting someone on the radio. Once again, there was no response from the other side, and this pushed Blake into more pressure, because no matter what, he had to keep his family alive. So, he told Charlotte to go and rest with Ginger while he started sealing up the house using nails and a hammer. The pain in his hand kept getting worse, and sweat was dripping down his face. As soon as he wiped the sweat away, suddenly, he began hearing loud knocking sounds, as if someone was walking on the wooden floor of his house. When he followed the noise and went upstairs, the sound seemed to come from inside the cupboard. But when he opened it, he found nothing except a huge spider crawling inside. This showed that Blake's senses had become so sharp that he could even hear the movement of a spider. Somehow, he managed to calm himself down. But then a strange foul smell started coming from outside. Felt as if someone was near his house. When he looked through the window, he saw the same man-eating wolf circling around, waiting to attack Blake and his family. Soon, the wolf came near the entrance, and as Blake moved in that direction, the wolf broke the wooden plank below and injured his leg. At that moment, Charlotte struck the wolf's paw with a hammer and saved Blake, but the pain was so intense that Blake fainted. After that, Blake suddenly woke up at exactly 2 a.m. and once again began hearing strange noises. Following those sounds, he went downstairs, only to realize that they weren't coming from outside, but from the radio's frequency. Charlotte was still trying to contact someone for help through it, Normally, hearing such frequencies is almost impossible for any human, which is why Blake became extremely frightened. Even after trying for a long time, Charlotte couldn't reach anyone. So she simply left an SOS message. My husband has been bitten by a strange creature and is now infected. I don't know anything about this infection, so please send help as soon as possible. After sending the message, she ended it. Meanwhile, Blake's condition kept getting worse. His face started changing in strange ways, and he was no longer able to speak properly. He even wet his pants. Out of fear of another attack, Charlotte somehow managed to calm him down and convince him that they had to stick together. They loved him deeply, and Blake never wanted to hurt them. After saying this, Charlotte took Blake to the room, helped him lie down, and then started thinking about how she could save her family. Meanwhile, Blake's hair had begun to fall out, and he had completely lost the ability to speak. With great difficulty, he wrote on a paper with a marker and asked Charlotte, "Am I going to die?" Hearing this, Charlotte was shattered inside, but pretending to be brave, she replied, "You're just sick. Everything will be fine soon, and you'll be back to normal because Ginger and I really need you." Charlotte spoke these words with a heavy heart, but at that very moment, Blake's vision changed strangely, and he could no longer understand what Charlotte was saying. From his reaction, Charlotte realized this too. She went to Ginger, waiting anxiously for the morning so she could take Blake to the hospital as soon as possible. But before that, Blake suddenly stood up from the couch in panic. Charlotte noticed that Blake's wound had become severely infected. When she tried to change his bandage, Blake suddenly went wild, scratching his own arms furiously. Another one of his teeth broke, which clearly showed that his humanity was fading away and the monster inside him was taking over. Somehow, Blake managed to control himself for a while, and Charlotte decided to take him away immediately because his condition was getting worse. Looking out of the window, she spotted a small Grady truck parked outside. Without wasting time, she rushed to find its keys, grabbed a battery and a knife, and then moved towards the truck with Blake and Ginger. Both Blake and Ginger climbed inside, while Charlotte began replacing the truck's battery. Meanwhile, inside the vehicle, Blake was almost fully turning into a human wolf creature, and his terrifying form was so horrifying that Ginger couldn't even look at him. Somehow, Charlotte managed to replace the battery and finally got the truck started. As soon as the driver turned on the wipers, the wolf suddenly appeared in front of him. It immediately smashed the windshield with its hands and damaged the truck's gear lever. The driver had no choice but to step out with Ginger and Blake. To save their lives, they quickly climbed onto a nearby greenhouse. But the wolf didn't stop chasing them. It began tearing the greenhouse apart. At one point, Ginger was about to get caught, but Blake somehow managed to save her. At that moment, Blake had no way to protect his family. After thinking for a while, he told Charlotte and Ginger to run back into the house. Then, he jumped down to distract the wolf and ran into the forest. Charlotte and Ginger managed to get inside safely, but they could still hear Blake's loud screams from the woods, which made Charlotte even more worried. Ginger also begged her mother to bring Blake back. But after some time, everything outside suddenly went silent. Blake, badly injured, was now standing outside the house again. But by that time, he had completely turned into a bloodthirsty wolf. After Ginger insisted repeatedly, Charlotte finally called Blake inside. As soon as he entered, he leaned against a nearby sofa, breathing heavily. Trying to comfort him, Ginger went close and, despite his terrible condition, placed her hand on his head and said, "I know what's on your mind. You're thinking about how much you love your daughter and how you will save her life, isn't it, Blake?" Although Blake couldn't hear her words, he understood everything she meant. That's when he decided to leave for the sake of his family's safety. But just as he opened the door to go, the monstrous wolf outside attacked him and broke into the house, trying to kill Blake. A brutal fight broke out between them, throwing each other around with immense force. At that moment, even the Charlotte picked up a dagger to help Blake. He struck the man-eating wolf on its back, but that only made the beast even angrier. The wolf then charged toward Charlotte to kill her. Blake quickly stepped in to protect Charlotte and fought the wolf, but it was extremely dangerous. Within moments, the wolf knocked Blake to the ground and began dragging him outside the house. Just then, the wolf heard Ginger screaming from another room, where she was trying to wake her father. Hearing her voice, the wolf turned toward her, but Charlotte tried to stop it by attacking. The wolf was about to kill Charlotte when Blake managed to stand back up. With all his strength, he bit into the wolf's neck and finally killed it. At that moment, Blake noticed a tattoo on the wolf's hand. His eyes widened in shock, because the wolf was none other than his own father, who had turned into a werewolf 30 years ago due to the curse and had been wandering the forest ever since. Blake was deeply hurt by this and didn't want to harm his family, so he ran away from there. Meanwhile, the driver had already understood everything. She explained to her daughter that 30 years ago, Blake's father had gotten lost in these forests and fell victim to a curse that turned him into a man-eating wolf. He had passed the same curse on to Blake. Saying this, Charlotte hugged Ginger tightly and started crying. Outside, Blake collapsed near the house, and his teeth began to change into sharp wolf fangs. His nails grew into claws, and once he fully transformed into a man-eating wolf, he rushed inside to attack Charlotte and Ginger. Somehow, Charlotte managed to grab Ginger and escape into the nearby shed, where it was completely dark. They thought Blake wouldn't be able to see them there, but that was their biggest mistake because with his wolf eyes, Blake could see everything clearly. He immediately tried to attack them again, but fate had other plans. His foot got stuck in a bear trap, the same one Grady had seen in the garage long ago, which was actually meant for wild animals. At that moment, Charlotte and Ginger ran into the forest, but Blake, desperate to continue his hunt, bit off his own leg and kept chasing them. By then, Charlotte and Ginger had already reached Blake's torn body, where Charlotte picked up his gun. To escape from Blake, she and Ginger climbed into a nearby hunter's cabin. Soon, Blake followed their scent and came there too. He climbed up and glared at them with anger, but when he saw Ginger, he somehow managed to control himself. Seeing her father's condition, Ginger realized Blake wanted Charlotte to shoot him so that everything would finally end. At first, Charlotte refused, but when Blake pretended to attack Ginger, she was forced to kill him. That day, Charlotte lost not only her husband but also her best friend. She broke down crying beside Blake's dead body, and later, to save Ginger, she left the forest with her and reached the valley where Grady had once brought Blake. And with that, the story comes to an end. Thanks for watching. Hope you enjoyed the story. If you did, give it a like, share it with friends, and subscribe so we can uncover more secrets together.